going to tell you a story. I'm 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 going to tell you a story.
Aurora Wasteland Quarantine by Vaughn Ashby.
Episode 6, The Alt C. Intro from the narrator. For a while after the virus hit, it felt like life was on pause. You didn't go to the dentist, you didn't see friends. Life just continued frozen as it was. You worked from home if you were lucky enough to have a job that allowed you to. You got up, worked, and then repeated it all over and over again. But like every ball-freezing Canadian winter, everything unfreezes. Chunks of life broke free from the COVID freeze. Sometimes that was good, like standing 6 feet away from your friends or family outside in the backyard around a fire pit. Sometimes it was bad. The company you worked for realizing that they have to shut down or let you go because life is different now. Some governments covered people in situations like this. They were the good ones. The virus was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Others, well, you were left on your own. I was lucky. Others I know weren't. World events like this should inspire compassion and empathy. This should be a point that united us as a species, but it didn't. Welcome to the Aurora Wasteland Quarantine. Police report. Dozens of bodies found in vacant office rental. Alberta, foul play, RCMP. Calgary, Alberta. RCMP are currently looking to identify bodies from a downtown office rental. It's unknown at this time if foul play was involved. Though most bodies were found relieved of their skin, the rest of their bodies remained intact. All bodies appear to have died within the last week. Anyone who knows a recent missing person should contact the RCMP. Well, unless it was your mother-in-law. Then, the RCMP have your back. Okay, I may have added the last part, but I mean, come on, mother-in-laws, am I right? The story. I took the police report, connected it to other sources, cross-referenced it with the Aurora Wasteland website, and well ran with it. Below is the story I was able to piece together. The waiting room was filled with people, all wearing masks. It was strange how normal the whole thing had become. Joanne glanced around, checking out the patterns, stripes, and folds of all the different mask types in the room, only to freeze when she checked out the mask of the man sitting across from her. He was staring at her and smiled when his eyes met hers. He waved, so she waved back. From what she could see of his face, he seemed handsome. His physique wasn't bad either. After a few seconds, the man got up and sat at the open chair to her right, which, thanks to the virus, was several feet away from her. He introduced himself as Diggs and asked if she was there for the job interview as well. She replied that she was, and the two exchanged stories of how they were both recently let go because of cutbacks caused by the virus. He worked at a hunting supply store, which he'd always found socially awkward. Not a lot of people expect a black man to be selling them hunting supplies. She'd worked for a local airport, moving supplies around for everyone. She'd called it logistics. Well, they both enjoyed their time off initially. Now, months later, they were getting bored and needed to start to plan further down the road. They'd both stumbled across an ad for a job posting here, in the newspaper of all places, and neither of them had been able to find anything out about the company online, which they both laughed should have been a red flag, but it wasn't until now. As the conversation died down between the two of them, Joanne glanced around the room, mostly at the posters on the wall. There was a pro-life poster, an All Lives Matter poster, and a Microsoft Software Partners poster. The Microsoft one seemed out of place, but the others she pointed out to Diggs. While neither of them was exactly sure what kind of job they were there to interview for, they both were certain they didn't want to be part of a company that would openly plaster posters like that in their waiting room. As they both got to their feet to leave, their names were called by a man and a woman, wearing way too snug coveralls holding clipboards. Diggs and Joanne looked at each other as their names were called again. They both shrugged as the same idea ran through their heads. This will make a great story to tell my friends. The two of them made their way over to the snug coverall-wearing man and woman who introduced themselves as Thomas and Samantha. Like everyone else in the room, they had cloth masks on, but were elbow to elbow with each other. They were obviously comfortable with each other. Diggs glanced at Joanne, who, in turn, glanced back at him. Like Thomas and Samantha, they were elbow to elbow. Neither of them had been this close to anyone outside their families in months. Diggs was married with a kid. Joanne lived common law with her girlfriend and many cats. The closeness felt strange. Both of them wanted to inch away from each other, while at the same time they wanted to inch closer. Though not in the expected sexual way. They both weren't each other's types, but more in a human connection way. Thomas and Samantha called 3 more names: Kate, Rosario, and Scott. A tattooed dark-haired woman, a red-haired woman, and a long-haired stubble-faced man joined the group. Thomas confirmed everyone's identity by asking for their IDs, then Samantha invited them all to follow her. She turned and led the group through a set of double doors and into a wide hallway. Diggs and Joanna hung back and brought up the tail of the group. The walls of the hallway were lined with what Diggs at first assumed were statues, but Joanne quickly corrected him that they were bodies. She told him that she'd seen things like this before at a bodies exhibit. The skin was removed from the dead bodies that were then posed into interesting positions to best show the muscles, bones, and everything else underneath. She'd found it creepy before at the exhibit. Now it was whatever came after creepy. Diggs agreed and pointed out the number of plaques next to each exhibit. The numbers weren't sequential. In fact, they appeared to almost be random. They passed 1, 2, 3, then 5, and 8. The numbers got bigger very fast. Thomas interrupted them. He told them they would find out what this was all about soon. They just had to get some HR stuff out of the way first. Joanne hated starting new jobs for that single fact, all the HR garbage that went along with it. Diggs had been with his old company long enough to have completely forgotten about the process until this moment. He didn't mind it. It meant getting a job, which, for right now, he was willing to look past all the stupid small things. The hallway ended with several door options. Each had a digital display above the door. Thomas and Samantha led them through the door that said Group 317811. Both Diggs and Joanne looked at each other as they exchanged the same thought. They were here for a job interview, not some amusement park ride. That seemed odd. A couple turns down smaller hallways and the group ended up in a door with no markings on it. Thomas and Samantha apologized that it would be a tight space with everyone in at the same time. But not to worry, it wouldn't last long. Thomas and Samantha opened the door and were the first to step into the small room that was an embarrassment to small rooms everywhere. In fact, the room should have been classified as a micro or tiny room. As all 7 of them packed into the room, Thomas asked Scott to close the door, which he did, much to the disappointment of everyone inside. Life, at the time of the virus, had forced people to become accustomed to having their own 6 feet of space when possible. The room they were currently occupying was less than 6 feet total in square footage. Everyone was close and touching everyone. Diggs constantly apologized as he was the largest person in the room. Joanne giggled at his embarrassment. The temperature in the room quickly rose with all of them in it. Samantha comforted everyone that it was almost over. Then the lights flickered off and back on again, only for a fraction of a second. But it was long enough for one of their group members to go missing. Rosario, the red-haired woman, was gone. Confused, everyone looked around the tiny room. There was nowhere she could have gone. The door hadn't opened. They all would have noticed. Plus, the lights were only off for a second. That wasn't even long enough to breathe, let alone leave the room. The group murmured to themselves as Thomas and Samantha ushered them out of the tiny room and back into the alley. They told everyone not to worry about it, and that a lot of people in the office had transitioned to working from home. That's probably just where she was. The whispers from the group increased at this. Diggs and Joanna knew it was a bullshit answer, and just as they were about to leave, Samantha started handing out everyone's ID badges with their ID numbers on them. Diggs was 121393. Joanne was 196418. There were pictures on their badges they didn't remember taking. In fact, they seemed to have taken when they were in the tiny room. Thomas and Samantha laughed at the looks on everyone's faces. They told them that the room was for scanning them, to make sure they were human, and to get their ID pictures. What did they think it was for? Samantha rolled up her sleeve and flashed the group a tattoo on her forearm that looked like it had been done on some poor tattoo artist's first day. She told them it was her ID number, 1597. She'd been there a long time, and that she was excited to have them on the team. Diggs and Joanne exchanged a look, neither of them sure this level of strangeness was worth it for the story at the end, but they shrugged and followed Thomas and Samantha down the hallway. Down one person from the initial group, their journey to the next destination was short. Thomas and Samantha ushered them into a room that looked more like a museum. There were cement floors, 2 leather backless benches, and lighting that highlighted the walls. Thomas started into a speech he'd obviously done dozens, if not hundreds of times. He walked around the room showcasing the art on the walls, or rather the walls that were art. Hand-drawn art encompassed the room along the walls. It reminded Joanna of cave paintings and Diggs of his own house and the wall art his son reluctantly does repeatedly in his bedroom. Thomas told them that the group used to worship a giant spider. Then, after the spider god turned on them in a traditional summoning, the group went corporate, where they purchased the building they were in today. Unfortunately, soon after they ran into financial troubles because, well, they bought a building, after which they managed to capture their spider god and milk it for financial means. Since then, they've been expanding and looking for more, which was why they were all there today. The corporation has plans for the future, exciting non-spider plans. By the time they exited the room, both Diggs and Joanna were certain they were on some kind of game show, the type that did ridiculous things to random people. They both believed this couldn't be real, but it was. As the group gathered in the hallway after the history lesson, Thomas and Samantha did a head count. Kate, the tattooed, dark-haired woman, was missing. 1 missing person was possible. 2 missing people. Shit. Both Diggs and Joanna had officially given up on wanting a good story. Now they just wanted out. The 2 of them glanced at each other, then turned and ran back down the hallway they just came from. Something was happening to the people in this group and they wanted none of it. They passed the museum-like room, then past what they thought was the tiny room, and just as they thought they were going to break into the large hallway with all the bodies posed in it, they didn't. Instead, they exited out into a large sound stage. The size of the room was enormous. TV cameras and lights were directed at a set that looked like the inside of a cabin. Board games lined the walls. Looking at the room, they expected it to be bustling with people, but it was silent. The closer they looked, the more it appeared like everyone had just vanished. Cameras were still on. Coffee sat in mugs next to chairs. Cue cards lay scattered around the floor just off stage. Had something happened here? Had the cast and crew evacuated? And most importantly, what the hell did this company do? Halfway across the large room, the doors they'd come through burst open. It was Thomas and Samantha. They were yelling at them to return to the group, that they needed to stick together, and halfway to Diggs and Joanna, Thomas vanished like someone had just edited him out of existence. Samantha paid no attention to it. She didn't skip a beat and continued to scold him. Diggs asked what they were filming here. Samantha ignored the question and ushered the 2 of them out of the room. She insisted they had places to be. They insisted they weren't going anywhere but home, to which Samantha laughed and said it was all the same thing. They'd just gotten the jobs and would be set up to work from home. They just had to fill out some final paperwork. Samantha led them out of the large room, through a separate set of doors they hadn't come in through, and into a room with a massively long dining table in the middle of it. She placed Diggs at one end and Joanne at the other. Papers with their names on them sat waiting, a pen carefully placed next to the papers. Samantha laughed with excitement. She told them to sign, that they could get started and get home. Joanne laughed, mimicking Samantha, then whipped the papers off the table. She asked where everyone was. Samantha looked at Joanne confused, then said she didn't know what she meant. Diggs started listing the names of the people from their group. Kate, Rosario, Scott, Thomas, then demanded to know where they were. Samantha awkwardly smiled at them. Then, like Thomas, she vanished. Diggs and Joanna were alone again. They looked at each other in a way that was becoming more and more familiar. They wanted, no, needed, to get out of there. Just as they were both about to get to their feet, a team of waiters and waitresses flooded into the room. Each carried a single piece of plating. One at a time, they placed them down in front of Joanne and Diggs. First a plate, then a knife, then a spoon. Soon, they each had a glass, completing the dining set in front of them. The last to be placed was a glass of some sort of sparkling drink, and a steak with gravy drizzled all over it. The waitress and waiters exited the room just as quickly as they'd arrived. Diggs poked the steak. It seemed normal, but that didn't mean he was going to eat it. Joanne pushed her chair back and rushed towards Diggs. This was all enough. It was time to go, time to... A loud voice echoed around the room. It sounded muffled, like it was coming through a set of old speakers. You just have to eat a bit of it, then it will all be over. Diggs shook his head, then whipped the plate, glass, and steak clear off the table in a cacophony of noise. Joanne laughed, grabbed the tablecloth on the long table, and yanked it hard enough to send her plate, steak, and table setting flying. Before her steak could hit the floor, the lights on the room went out, leaving Diggs and Joanne alone in the dark. A single light remained on. It illuminated a door neither of them had noticed before. Good job on the whole not eating the steak test. You can go now, the voice echoed around the room. Diggs and Joanna looked at each other confused. Test? Test for what? Slowly, the two of them crossed the room towards the single light and the door that lit it up. Joanne was the first to the door, and rested her hand on the knob. She sighed. This was all stupid. She just came here for a job. She didn't want all this extra garbage. Diggs watched Joanne vanish, just like she'd been edited out of life. He placed his hand on the doorknob. It was still warm from her touch. He turned the knob and stepped into a standard office meeting room. The room was empty except for Thomas, who laid in the center of the table, dead. Broccoli placed over his eyes, other vegetables scattered around his body. Cautiously, Diggs approached the body. He half whispered Thomas's name to see if he could wake him up, but he didn't. His chest didn't rise. The man was dead. Except he wasn't. Not fully, but only technically. Like I said, we're moving on to other big things, Thomas said, moving only his mouth. We used to worship the spider. Now we worship something bigger, something... Thomas froze with his mouth open, the next words frozen on his lips. And that was it. Diggs snapped. He'd had enough. He had a kid at home and none of this was cool. Whatever this was, it had to end now. He wasn't playing and the walls around him flopped open. A man with a clipboard wearing an old sweater rushed over to him. He told Diggs he'd gotten the job. He just needed to sign the papers and it would all make sense. Diggs grunted, and with all the non-politeness he told the man to fuck off. The man replied simply by saying, "Oh, I guess you don't get the job. Well, we weren't sure you were right anyways, you know, with your precondition and all." Diggs stared, confused. What precondition? The man laughed, as if he could hear Diggs's thoughts. The virus. As much as we don't believe it's really here, you have it, thus disqualifying you for the... In mid-sentence, just like Kate, Rosario, Scott, Thomas, Samantha, and Joanne, the man vanished, leaving him alone. It took hours for Diggs to find the way back out of the office to the lobby. He didn't see another living soul on his way out. As soon as he got to the elevator, he thought of Joanne. He hoped that wherever she was okay. He was going to tell everyone about this place. He pressed the button on the elevator, and the doors closed. Everyone needed to know. He needed to find Joanne. The doors to the elevator opened. The large room with the table sat in front of him. Joanne was still on one end. Diggs smiled at her, and noticed everyone else who had vanished sitting at the table with her. He stepped free of the elevator, and vanished, leaving the world he knew behind. Newspaper headlines. Gaslighting and misinformation leads to increased death from the virus. Edmonton Epoch. Cult transitions from spider worship to corporate mass extinction. Brightness Falls, Gateway. Data points to conservative government's mishandling of the virus constant across the globe. Calgary Science Digest. If the virus is so serious, why aren't the spiders dead? Your uncle's Facebook page and newsletter. Virus-related job loss leading to people taking jobs they'd normally avoid. Lethbridge, Dark Times. Conclusion from the narrator. That's it. Who knew? As the world returned to normal, the new normal would be dealing with all the crazy, weird, and strange things that had escaped while we weren't paying attention. Like Diggs, a lot of us were let go. That's life. You roll with it when you can. It sucks. Trust me. I know. Okay, I'm going off script here. Sometimes I feel like Diggs' story. No, not Diggs, but the story itself. I feel like pieces of what I knew as myself vanish from, well, me. I hope this all ends soon. I need to get out. I need to see other people. I don't know. My name is Vaughn Ashby. I wrote this. If you liked what you heard, head on over to vaughnashby.com/free and pick up a free novel or a bunch of other free stuff. Go explore the Aurora Wasteland yourself at aurorawasteland.com. Don't forget to check out the Stories from the Wasteland podcast and search for Vaughn Ashby on YouTube for video versions and other exciting videos. Thanks for listening.